Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of my mini-series, Patching with Purpose. Today we are going to take a deep dive into making a patch that's focused around rhythm. So if you haven't seen the other episodes, in the first episode I kind of laid out a framework for making patches intentionally and purposefully. In episode 2, I went through a patch that was focused around melody and harmony. And in this one, we're going to focus all on rhythm. If you haven't seen those, definitely go back and watch the first one. That will give you sort of a frame of reference for what I'm going to do here today. If you like this stuff, make sure to hit subscribe so you get notified when I put out a new video. Also, I'm putting up all of these patches on my Patreon page. I'd really appreciate it if you could support my efforts and sign up there. And then finally, at the end of this mini-series, I'm going to put tracks from each video onto an album on my Bandcamp page so you can kind of hear how all of these tracks sort of fit together on an album. As I did in the previous video, I think it makes sense to start with some influences or recommended listening, just some modular artists that I think are really cool that I can kind of draw from when I'm making these patches. Number 1 is Stevio. If you've watched my channel, you definitely know I'm a big fan of his. He's someone who got me into modular in the first place. I really loved his work for machine jazz. All of his stuff has this very organic, polyrhythmic, sort of jazzy kind of swing thing going on, and I just really dig it. I've watched a ton of his videos and explanations. I'll put links to some of those things down in the description. I highly recommend checking them out. And I'll talk specifically about some things that he's talked about when we're making our patch. The next artist that I think is worth checking out has a pretty funny name. The artist is Hippies Wearing Muzzles. It's a guy named Lee Evans. I stumbled upon his album Animist Pools on Spotify, and it was really great. It had some really kind of just percussive, rhythmic stuff going on. But it wasn't like techno, like in your face, fast, percussive. And I just kind of easily fell into this kind of flow, just listening to it and relaxing. I've checked out a bunch of his other work on his Bandcamp page, and it's really great. I don't know a lot about him or his workflow or anything like that, but I'm definitely going to dig more into his work because the album Animist Pools is definitely worth checking out. So the kind of whole point of this exercise of coming up with the framework and then making a patch around it is that we're going to make a plan before we even get to the sound studio. So we know that we're going to have a rhythmic patch. So let's go through our principles, which are tonality, texture, and timbre. So as far as tonality is concerned, I don't want the tone or the melody or harmony to really shine. I'm really looking for the rhythm to take center stage on this patch. So I'm going to use scales and harmonies that are more like plain pasta that we can build on and are not going to steal the show. For textures, since we're thinking about percussive patches, I want to leave a lot of space. We don't want a huge, dense track with lots of fast attack type envelopes, kind of little plucks or punches, little spikes of sound. I don't want to say abrasive, but maybe has some traction to it. So definitely not like a smooth kind of smoothed out sound. We want to hear like different things going on. And then for timbre, we want to really be thinking about noise. We're going to introduce a lot of noise, things like thuds, things like clicks and pops. So that's the kind of timbre that we're going to have. So those are kind of our principles. And as we go to the sound studio, we're going to make choices about melody and harmony and rhythm. And we're going to kind of incorporate that whole plan going in. I'm also going to incorporate some of Stevio's ideas that I've heard him talk about with rhythm and prime numbers and using those to generate polyrhythms. So with that as kind of an overarching plan for what we're going to do, let's go over to the sound studio, set it to a default track, and we'll build it up from scratch. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with the mother. The reason I'm going to do that is because I want to explain some of the polyrhythmic stuff that we're going to be going for. One of the things I heard Stevio talking about in one of his videos was using prime numbers to create polyrhythms. So what we're going to be doing is setting up sequences and divisions of the clocks in prime numbers. And one of the primary purposes for that, prime numbers are only divisible by one in themselves. And if you have two sequences going at two different divisions of prime numbers, like a 13-step sequence and say a 7-step sequence, as those two sequences play, they will never start again on the one until however many steps, if you have to multiply them together to figure out how many steps they are. So you create these super long evolving patterns that never really repeat until they've gone through their sequence a whole bunch of times. I'm going to explain that in more detail as I go. The Sound Studio isn't set up perfectly for that. We're going to try and use that as a sort of influence. We're also, on the mother, going to use some ideas from Euclidean rhythms. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to clear the sequence. So we're going to program in a 13-step sequence. And 13 because it's a prime number. And let's just go ahead and start that. So I'm going to go into record mode. We'll make sure we're in step mode. And I'm going to set the end. So right here we have 8 steps, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I'm going to set the end at 13. All right, now let's program in some notes. Actually, before we program in notes, let's set some rests. So what a Euclidean rhythm is you have a set number of steps and then a set number of triggers, and you spread those triggers out evenly throughout the steps. That's a very, very simplified version of it, but we're going to try and do that here. So I've got 13 steps, which is a prime number. I'm going to include 5 triggers over those 13 steps, which is 5 is also a prime number. So watch how this plays out. We'll go back to page 1 and we'll trigger on step 1. Then on step 2, we'll rest. And on step 3, actually I think I can just push that, we'll rest as well. Step 4 will trigger. Step 5 and 6 will rest. Step 7 will trigger. Step 8 will rest. Step 9 will rest. Step 10 will trigger. 11 and 12 will rest. So it's spread out almost perfectly. That's the first 8 steps. That's the second. The last 5 steps. And we've got 2 sets of prime numbers. We've got 5 and we've got 13. So actually, before we even program any notes, let's just hear what that sounds like. I've got this set to a default setting, so let's just go ahead and... There we go. Actually, I'll set that to envelope and we'll turn it up a little bit, turn the cutoff down a little bit. All right, so let's hear it. Now, without any type of rhythm going in the background, it's kind of hard to tell that this is going at a strange interval. So let's go ahead and set the DFAM up. I'm not going to do a whole lot right now. Let's just set it to go. Let's a little kick sound on, let's say the first step and the 5th step. So we'll just set up something easy like this. Just set up that, run it through. We're going to go from the assign output of the mother into the advanced clock of the DFAM. Now we'll be able to hear what it sounds like together. pretty cool stuff. So then you can kind of use some math to figure out how many times it has to play through to both land on the 1 again. And how you would have to do that is go 13 times 8. So if you multiply 13 times 8, you got 104. So it would have to do 104 steps before it lands on the 1 on both the DFAM and the mother again. On the DFAM, that would mean 13 steps through because it's 8 times 13. And on the mother, it would be 8 times through because it's 13 times 8. So that's pretty cool. That means it's going to go for a while before it even repeats once. And it goes for even longer when you start introducing prime number rhythms in the Subharmonicon. And when we have all the sequencers going at different rates, that's when things get really super cool. Now, just again, I want to say that the 8-step sequencer on the DFAM makes this, from an academic standpoint, kind of hard to do because 8's not a prime number. So it's not perfect, but in some ways, I think that having the DFAM go at a steady kind of normal rate almost makes it sound better because it kind of holds down the fort while everything else is going. But all right, let's get back to the mother. We need to program in some notes. As I said in the intro, we don't want to make melody and harmony shine out at all. This is a rhythmic track. That's the purpose of the track. That's what we're going for. So we want to choose something relatively safe and not that interesting for the actual notes that we choose. I'm going to work in C major pentatonic because I think that's a pretty vanilla kind of scale. And in fact, for the sequence on the mother, I'm going to have it playing almost like a bass sequence. And I'm going to stick to chord tones for a C6 chord. So that's C, E, G, and A. So let's go ahead and program in some notes. I'm going to go back into record mode. We'll go over to our step mode. This is the easiest way, I think, to program in specific notes. And for the first one, let's go down to the 3rd octave and we'll just play a C. And then we'll go to the 4th step and we'll go still 3rd octave. We'll play G. 7th step. Let's go back to that C. Again, we're keeping things super simple. For this one, let's play that E just to give it the major tonality. And then for the last one, here, we'll go down to a low A. All right, let's hear what that sounds like. Sounds pretty good. This is with the saw wave. I think I like the... And if we want to turn the mix up, sounds even more percussive. Sounds really great. And we haven't even touched the Subharmonicon yet. It's awesome. All right, before we go down to the Subharmonicon, let's head up to the DFAM and just dial in that sound, make it a little bit more interesting. So it was already pretty good. Let's just listen to it. I'm going to turn down the mother and we'll play it through. So I want to introduce some kind of offbeat hits. So I'm going to put in pitch to noise level. Let's go 3/4, maybe something like this. Again, I don't want to introduce this kind of like rolling thunder that the DFAM thing is good at. I just want to have a lot of space. I want to hit some offbeats, but I still want there to be a lot of space for the other instruments to kind of jump in. I bet if we turn up the pitch here, let's just go ahead and try something like that just for now, and we can tweak it later. But let's go ahead and hear what that sounds like. That sounds pretty cool. We can dial it in once we introduce the other instruments, but let's just hear how that sounds relative to the to what we had going with the mother. That sounds great. So it's already grooving. That sounds awesome already. It's going to sound even better once we get the Subharmonicon in. So let's head on down to the Subharmonicon and see what we can do. Okay, so this is where things are going to get super interesting. Polyrhythms are what the Subharmonicon is made for. It's going to be awesome. It would be really awesome if we could set the sequencer to go in a prime number of steps. We obviously can't do that. We're limited to 4 steps each. But what we can do is set the subdivisions for the clock of each of these to go at prime numbers. We're going to have rhythm 1 going at 7 steps, a subdivision of 7. So every 7 steps of the mother, it's going to go 1 step forward because 7 is a prime number. Rhythm 2 is going to be set to 11, which is also a prime number. So that means that we have a bunch of prime numbers kind of programmed in. On the mother, we have every 3rd step is triggering. So that's a 3. We have 5 triggers in total for the Euclidean rhythm. So that's 5. We have 13 steps, which is 13. We have 7 on the rhythm 1. We have 11 on rhythm 2. So the only other prime number between 0 and 13 would be 2. And I guess we can kind of say that the DFAM's going in an even number, so we'll just count it. This isn't a perfect experiment again, but hey, it's cool. And it gives us some direction. We're creating this polyrhythm. And so if we were to try and figure out how many steps would have to pass by before all of the sequencers reset on 1 all together in unison, you'd have to multiply 13 times 7 times 11 times 8. And that's 8,008 steps before it resets. That's pretty awesome. So if we're thinking about 16th notes, that means that'll be 2,002 beats. And if we're thinking about 120 beats per minute, that means that it's going to be about 16 minutes before this entire sequence plays out. I'm not 100% sure on that math, but I'm pretty sure if you take the time to figure it out and you find out I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments section. But I think that's right. Either way, that's going to impact our form when we get there, because with this type of polyrhythmic thing where it's sort of evolving slowly over 16 minutes, even if I'm wrong, it's a very long time. So as it evolves, you don't need to do a whole lot to change up the sound to keep it interesting, because it's constantly making new things on its own. There are some ways we can play with sort of the intensity and having things sort of loosen and lock in, almost like the way I think of like a drum circle or something like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's program in these rhythms on the Subharmonicon. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that we're going to go in 8 steps equal temperament, and I'm going to make sure that these are tuned to C. So how I like to do that is turn everything down but one oscillator, and we'll go ahead and so now all we're hearing is oscillator 1. I'm going to tune this all the way down to the C at the bottom. Let's go to oscillator 2. Okay, so we got a low C, we got a kind of middle C right there. For the sub frequencies, I want them just to be playing unisons. So I'm going to set this one to a subdivision of 4 and this one to a subdivision of 2. So I'm going to turn this up, turn this down. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's just a low C. And then we'll do this one as a subdivision of 2. So now we have this giant C unison. Nice. And on this one, I'm going to do the same thing. And then we'll have this be a subdivision of 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a subdivision of 2, 1, 2. And it gives us a nice C unison. Nice. All right, let's go over and set our rhythms. Now, how I like to do this is I use one of the rhythms that I'm not going to be using and set it as a reference. So I'm going to assign that to sequencer 2. That means every time I hit this next button, that's one pulse of the clock. So if I set sequencer 1 to something else, then I can just count out the pulses of the clock and it'll tell me when it switches, I'll know what I have it set to. So I was going for 7 and 11. Let's go ahead and put this at 7. I know 8 o'clock is right just about 12 o'clock. These things aren't exact, which is kind of unfortunate, but should be right about there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I nailed it. So that's going at 7. So now I need to program in this one. So I'm going to turn this off and we'll set our reference to go on sequencer 1 now. Sequencer 2, I'm going to program in for 11. So if that's 8, I'm assuming 11 is somewhere around there. Let's just see if I got it right. Now this one's the reference now because it's assigned to sequencer 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Wow. I almost never hit those on the first time, but I did it. So now we have, I'm going to turn that off now. Now we have a 7 and an 11. Let's just go ahead and let's dial in like kind of plucky sound and hear what this sounds like. Cool. So again, you can't really tell the polyrhythm too much if you're not hearing it within the backdrop of something holding it down. So hearing something against it. You can kind of tell that there's something interesting going down because one's going at 7, one's going at 11, but it doesn't really shine out. So I'm going to go ahead right now. We're going to hear it. I'm going to plug in, go out of the trigger of the DFAM and into the clock of the Subharmonicon. And we'll reset everything and see what it sounds like. So here we go. That just sounds so cool already. All right. It just sounds so cool. This is where things really get fun. All right, let's program in a sequence for our notes. So again, I don't want to make things too complicated. Let's start with sequencer 2. This is VCO 2. So here, I have to unplug it to program it. So right now, the first step is we're going to make sure that this is set to 0, that it doesn't influence the sound. And see, you know, if you hit the trigger and push this, if it doesn't change the sound, then you know it's perfectly set to 0. If it was up a little bit, then it would... So we want to have it set to 12 o'clock. So now it's set so to not give any control voltage, it won't change the notes, which are C. So let's actually have it be a low C to start. So we're going to go down 7 steps. Awesome. Now the next one, let's have this go up. Let's go up to G. E, F, G. And then let's just keep it simple. We'll play another G. And then for this one, we'll just leave it at that C. So this is super simple. So this is just VCO 2. Nice. And we'll do something simple with the next one too. So VCO 1 will set up like this. Why don't we start this one with the G? That sounds good. Then we'll go down. Get a real bassy note in there. And we could add an F in there if we want it. No, we don't want to deviate from our C major pentatonic. We could add that color tone, that D. There is a D in the C major pentatonic. So yeah, let's go ahead and just do that. And then we'll have this last one go up to G. All right, so let's hear how this one sounds. And then together. That sounds really good. All right, now here's where the magic is. We're going to hear them all together, all at once. We'll reset everything. I'm going to plug it back in to the clock. And let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like. How you kind of want to, what I'm going to aim to do is really dial in the settings so that none of the sounds, none of the voices are shining out as the lead. I want them all to mix together perfectly. Sounds fantastic. All right, that sounds awesome. Let's add in some subtle modulation. I really want like a slow LFO affecting something. So I'm going to go, let's have it impact the cutoff of the Subharmonicon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the triangle of the LFO out to mix 2 of the VC mix. Then we can use it as an attenuator. I'm using the blue chords to kind of denote the modulation source. We'll go into the cutoff of the Subharmonicon. So that will allow us to use this VC mix to kind of introduce this very, very, very slow LFO wave to be adding basically another rhythm source, because this is not synchronized to the clock. So it'll add a little bit of randomness to it. So let's go ahead and listen to what that sounds like. All right. So right now there's no modulation happening because this is all the way down. But as we introduce it, let's go up a little bit. Now it goes down. We'll add it here. Let's turn it all the way up so you can really hear it. I like it a little bit more subtle than that. Sounds fantastic. Man, I just love this polyrhythmic stuff. It just sounds so cool. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about a form and how you could put this into like a finished track. So the way I kind of think about it is like drum circles. I mentioned that before. So one way you could approach it is just by slowly introducing different elements and having them grow. And I think that's a good idea to do that and sort of plan out which ones are going to go first, and then which ones, how you're going to get out of it too, which ones are going to come out. Another way you can add some variety to it is to open up your decays of your filters, introducing the mix. One thing that I think is super cool with this is that if you slow down the attack and decay at the same time, it sort of makes it play almost a little bit behind the beat. And just like a drum circle, if you've ever played in a drum circle or listened to them, as people get going and it gets more intense, people sort of like lock in. And so what I think is nice about that little move is when you crank it down to a fast attack again, it gives us a sudden feeling of everything tightening up again. I think that just as one form that I'm going to try here is we'll start with the DFAM in the mother. Then I'll slowly introduce the Subharmonicon. We'll keep our modulation down to a minimum. Keep everything super tight at first. And I'm not going to do any sudden moves other than that attack move. But I'm going to slowly introduce everything, slowly introduce some noise, and slowly introduce the VC mix. And then there's something else cool I want to show you that you could almost make like a drum solo-y kind of thing going on here. So we'll kind of introduce everything. We'll do our little drum solo. Then we'll tighten everything back up and slowly let's go for an outro. We'll take the DFAM and the mother out, and we'll end with just the Subharmonicon. We'll try and end it on a time where they're both going to the one. We'll see how this works out. It might take, I haven't practiced this one, so we'll see how it goes. But let's just reset everything and we'll get started. All right, here we go. All right, now I'm going to bring in the Subharmonicon. Now again, you can just let these ring out because it has that polyrhythm. Just slowly try and dial in everything so that nothing's standing out in the mix. Now I'm going to slowly introduce some modulation. Add in some of the mix. We'll let that settle for a minute. So just to give an example of how you can loosen, tighten things up with the attack decay trick, let's try that right now. You don't have to do much, just a little bit. Listen to how much it tightens up when I tighten everything back. It's just a really nice effect. All right, so let's do our drum solo. So I'm gonna kick up the mix. Turn down my envelope a little bit. So now listen to this. If we turn up the VCO decay, you can almost play these sort of manually. right, that's enough of that. All right, let's bring everything back in. So now I'm going to end it, and I want it to have the sub be the ending, so I'm going to slowly fade these out. And that's it. So there you have it. That's my patch. I'm going to write this all up and put it on my Patreon page. If you like it, I would really appreciate it if you could support my efforts and head on over to Patreon and sign up. Either way, please subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.